Welcome back. Today in our Sunday Spotlight, a Connecticut nurse goes to Ukraine. In January, Eric Parker had an opportunity to speak with Greg Klaus, a Yale nurse specializing in trauma care. Klaus made 2 visits to the war-torn country late last year. He talks about his experience as part of a team brought into the country by the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and the International Medical Corps to train doctors, nurses, paramedics, and others in life-saving care. Take a look.
First, the question would be, we've covered this conflict, this war in Ukraine, and seen some of the devastating pictures. And I think our viewers might start with wanting to know, why did you sign up to go there?
So, interestingly enough, it started out with how I got brought into it was by an email from a friend of mine who said, you might be interested in this. And having been involved in teaching trauma care to nurses at Yale New Haven for at least 15, 16 years, it was like, interesting idea. And it was a personal challenge and also a professional challenge to go. And literally, I contacted the organization and sent my resume, and I was frankly surprised when they called me back and said, would you be interested in going? Because it was a multi-step process, and they were starting classes at the end of August and were going to the end of October. So it was an ongoing thing. It wasn't just a one-shot deal.
All right, so we have some pictures, and I think we can show some of those pictures to our viewers as you're talking. But while we look at some of those, tell me, what was the experience like? How did it maybe differ from what you do here in the United States teaching trauma care versus what you had to do over there? So
the most interesting thing is, of course, I'm in a country that has not only a different language, but a different alphabet. So, I mean, you know, we have our alphabet, they have the Cyrillic alphabet. So we had to work very closely with our interpreter staff, and we also had to make sure that as we were presenting the topics, which had not been fully translated into Ukrainian, to not get too far ahead of our interpreters, because then we would have to stop. They would have to catch up, and it was a constant back and forth. It was great working with the interpreters. They were a great group of people. The students were either paramedics, possibly military medics, nurses, some doctors in training, and they were all extremely grateful for this stuff. This picture here shows me, actually I was delivering a lecture on pregnancy and trauma, and I'm literally waiting for the translator to catch up to what I just said, because I learned that if I got too far ahead, I'd actually have to start over, so to speak, and sometimes I almost forgot what I was talking about. This view here is actually an aerial view of St. Michael's Cathedral in Kyiv, which has a very interesting history. This is another ground shot. This is in front of St. Michael's, where they have their Tower of Freedom, I think they called it, and in the background they actually had some war wreckage of Russian vehicles that had been destroyed, and they just dragged them into the square for everyone to see.
Well, certainly the juxtaposition between the beauty and the war-ravaged countryside is certainly startling. What was your impression of these students, these paramedics, these military medics, these nurses and doctors? Were they thirsty for this knowledge? Were they
very much so
in need of it? Is it a dire need for this type of education?
I think some of it was, so was there a dire need? Perhaps, because their medical system is very different from how we practice and how our medical system is arranged in the United States. And they were like sponges. They just could not seem to get enough. Some of it was some review material for some, but also at the same time they appreciated the effort and the fact that we were coming to assist them with this process.
You said you worked in emergency department since 1981?
Since 1982 is when I started working.
So from 82 on, you worked there, and obviously, whether it's Yale New Haven or at one of the other hospitals in our state, you could see a car accident victim, you could see a shooting victim, you could see people with any sort of other number of traumas. Are the patients that they're seeing there with war trauma different?
So they're different in terms of what we would see, you know, with civilian trauma. However, given everything that's gone on in the last 20 years, I mean, obviously we are seeing, you know, we are seeing more more intense types of trauma based on the situations. However, I am sure along with, the war wounded, they're still seeing people from car accidents, falls, all that sort of stuff. And so it was more a matter of also providing nurses and physicians who had no previous trauma training, who might be being pulled into a non-traditional area that they are used to practicing in, to provide this care, to give them basically a foundation to start taking care of patients.
Well, and I know one of the things that you talked about was the stop the bleed training, which is so critically important, whether you're injured here in Rocky Hill or in Kyiv. That kind of thing can be such a lifesaver. Is that the kind of knowledge you were hoping to bring them?
Some of that, yes, absolutely. I mean, that was part of this whole program that was put together by International Medical Corps, who was the country sponsoring agency, and Harvard Humanitarian. And yes, in those classes we had police officers, we had EMS professionals, we had doctors, nurses, and in one class that I was directly involved in, we had a young lady who was a hairdresser, and she's just, I need to know this information.
Wow.
So again, targeting, non-traditional providers who could provide that life-saving care.
Just tell us about the experience. I saw a quote from you. You said you didn't feel the bombs, but you heard them. So certainly you're in a conflict zone. What was it like? So
that particular morning, we were teaching a class in Zaporizhia, which is the capital of the oblast or state of Zaporizhia, which is one of those areas that was half controlled by the Ukrainians, half controlled by the Russians. And so there was active fighting. And on a straight line map distance, we were about 25 kilometers from the front line, I guess. However, there was also a big river and lake in between us and between the city and where the front line was. So we were just, basically teaching our class, and at the end of a break, as we were about to start up, the security manager came out, and he's telling us to get to the bomb shelter immediately. The bomb shelter was the garage underneath the hotel that we were teaching in, and we got there, and as we made it to the floor of the garage, we heard two large booms. And so what had happened is, heard the booms, didn't feel any shaking or anything like that, and I looked at the security manager and I said, that was about maybe 3-4 miles away, and he went, yeah, and I said, what's there? And he goes, there's an electrical plant that they're aiming for. Wow. And so we ended up continuing the first day of that class in the garage, in the bomb shelter. The next day, we actually completed the class by Zoom, and the very interesting thing of that was, while we're conducting the class,
we'll have a few seconds left. Keep going.
You could actually see people dropping off the call because there were still bombs falling or missiles falling in Zaporizhia the next day.
Wow, well, we checked in with Greg Klaus this week, and after Eric's interview with him in January, he made another trip to Ukraine, and he shared this video. This is from his trip to Irpin in February, and places where air raid sirens still go off. And we want to show you here also a couple of pictures that he took of the destruction and bomb impacts when those areas were the focus of the Russia attacks. Klaus was there teaching trauma protocols to Ukrainians and will teach others as well. He says the program is moving into its final phase, where native speakers will take over running these courses. And that is CT'23 for this week. CBS Sunday Morning is next. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Eric Parker will meet you right back here in Studio A next Sunday.